in some more people in, but well, the topic for this week is humanity and history. And when I picked this topic, what I had in mind was just this idea of, are we doomed to repeat our past mistakes? To what extent do we really learn from them? And honestly, with what's going on right now, I really kind of question myself, well, is it that we're not learning from our past mistakes, or is it that we're not really getting to the root of the problem? Could it be that? Because, if you think about the fact that at one point, we did have a civil war, we had the civil rights movement, we had the riots in the 90s, and now we have things going on with George Floyd, Trayvon Martin, so on and so forth. Why is that the case? Why is it that it continues? And it seems to me it's just because there seems to be this kind of illusion that it's primarily about race. But I don't think it necessarily is. I think it's this idea that there's this dehumanization of people, where basically they're just looked at as numbers. They're just looked at as, oh yeah, casualties and the greater good. And I think that's something that we're not kind of able to solve, and that's really like the root of this problem. It's kind of what I'm getting from this. I'm curious as to what you guys think.
I think it really comes down to how you're defining the problem, and I mean that by in the news, in most people's conversations, you deal racism is a very big deal, and it's a notoriously very popular topic. However, in history, there are many different types of discriminations that intertwine with one another. An example of that would be in the 70s and 80s, you started to have the disability rights movement. And as you mentioned, in the 50s, 60s, you had the civil rights era. And in the early 1900s, you had late 1800s, early 1900s, you had the women's suffrage movement, and then now in the present you have feminism. And so it really comes down to how you are, I guess you could say, contextualizing the problem. And then when you contextualize the problem, then you're able to sort of put into perspective where the responsibility lies. And that was one thing that I wrote for my psychology final, because I'm a registered election judge, and I'm a registered voluntary deputy registrar for Dallas County. And one of the problems that
is it me only the one who's having the issue with the internet, or?
Yeah, on my screen as well. It looks like you might have.
Choppy on my side as well.
Okay.
Rory, you've been on mute the entire time. Can you start from the beginning?
I was on mute.
No. Just the last part was getting interrupted.
No, but you're making some good points. Before we go any further, though, should we just state out loud so everybody knows what the topic is today? Before kind of delving into it, does everybody know what the topic is?
I mean, I think
I do not.
But apparently Jasmine do not know yet really what the topic is.
Okay, I thought I said it at the start. Is humanity and history.
Yeah, I think you mentioned humanity and history, something like that.
Okay. So yeah,
you can always find the topics on our Instagram page.
Oh, excellent.
Sorry, Fernando.
No, it's all right. I do agree. Well, I'm not gonna say I completely agree, but I do see some of the point that Orlando was saying, because it does seem sometimes that it is a cycle that in society we keep having kind of like similar issues, but at the same time I do feel like it is not really like a cycle. Maybe it's like a spiral, because like along the way we do improve some stuff, even though like it might like some of the issues are similar, but that doesn't mean that we're tackling the same exact thing. I do believe that throughout our history we have improved in some areas. It's just that um, since the result, like the riots are similar, like they were still facing like society's issues with like who is the majority, who is the minority, and who is applying more force over the other. It kind of seems like we are not really nearly the complete like root of the essence of whatever is the issue having, but at the same time, like it's not like we are getting no advancement at all. So that's something there for me to kind of like explore. But I think Marcus has something to say.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's it's humans' greatest problem. Okay, it's the fact that we're all the same thing. We're all the same species, and yet for some reason there's a blockade that is preventing us from this cohesiveness that should exist but does not. You know, it's all these other things in the world have a harmony with each other, but humans, we seem to overstep our harmony, and we are never in line with that harmony. Almost, it's almost impossible because, like we said, it's almost a cycle or a spiral, whatever you want to call it, because it's relearned. Humans pass it down, and then isn't fixed, and then we don't even know what to fix sometimes because it seems as if we've tried to fix the same problem, but then it's like it's not working. So are we trying to fix the right problem, or is there have we even identified the right problem? It's that we can't identify like ourselves with another human just because they're different than us. That's the issue. That's the bottom line issue, is that we have this inability to place ourselves within their body, to understand their perspective, simply because they're different from us, even though they're the exact same thing as us. It's like ants. You know, ants have no trouble going around doing stuff. They don't look at a army ant and go, "Hey man, why are you doing that?" Or like, "Why? Oh, this guy's got a bigger abdomen than me." Hell no. It's like no. It's like they're just doing their thing. You know.
Kentucky.
Be more like ants.
Yeah, I think it's a good point you made is just like this inability to kind of empathize or see it from the other person's perspective. You know, I mean, we live like in this place where we idolize the rich and then look down on the poor, and the people who are at the bottom kind of have this get out at all cost mentality. And it's like to some extent, it's just we're kind of focused on our own little bubble. We're not really focused on the betterment of all. And so, like, let's say if racism was to even go away, you know, still have social class discrimination that would still exist. And so I think there's a point to be made here. Like it's not necessarily just rooted in these very small instances, but it's something there's a bigger picture to kind of look at, and that's where the root of the issue is. But how to solve it, I think it's so difficult.
Agreed.
Yeah. Well, I like you are mentioning also empathy. Um, I do believe that's an impact, like important factor that is happening right now. I don't completely think that we're unable to empathize with each other, but I feel like sometimes we choose not to empathize, so we don't feel as guilty as if we otherwise would be when we really want to do something.
Very true.
Like let's say like you want a cake, and maybe you already ate that somebody has ate nothing at all, but you still really want the cake, so you just kind of like, okay, I'm not gonna think that that person hasn't eaten anything, so I can grab the cake and I don't feel guilty about it. So sometimes I feel like people like really opt to not empathize just to not feel as guilty as they would be otherwise.
It's a discomfort that they choose not to feel. Exactly. That's a very good point. Yeah.
Huh.
They choose
And
not to feel
also,
the discomfort of, you know, facing that issue with yourself.
and also
It
I
is a
feel
discomfort.
like I'm sorry. Also, I feel like it's this feeling of like, what can I really do? You know, like to what extent can I, as a person, really affect the system? You know, because I mean, I feel like in terms of the voting in general, like I feel like a lot of people feel as if their vote doesn't count, and I mean, that's one of the ways that's the direct influence that we have on our system, and yet people still feel that so prominently. So I think it's also this idea of like we need complete unity, but we find it so difficult to even get there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you see that a lot at the local level. I know when I was presiding an election judge during the state joint elections and at the primaries, my population of voters were definitely older, and they didn't take me seriously at first because I'm 23 and I was the oldest election official at that polling location.
Hmm.
And it wasn't until I stood my ground and say, look, I may be younger than you, but I know what I'm talking about. And that's when people started taking me seriously. And so as young adults, I think it comes down into play of just showing the older population, the community, that yeah, we may be young, but we know what we're talking about.
Hmm.
I beg to disagree. I'm joking. I'm joking.
Uh, of course you do.
That sounds like ageism. I'm sorry to hear that. That's terrible.
Yeah, it really became a big problem at the end of the primaries. To give an idea of the situation, I was zoned for J.O. Davis Elementary School in Irving, and we were sort of put in the way back of the school, and half of that whole room was covered in chairs and tables. So we didn't have the space that we really needed. Plus, we also had constantly had technology issues, and we had other issues, and I would have to do managerial overrides. And people were so frustrated. They're like, why can't we vote? Why is it taking so long? And I'm just like, look, I understand you want your voice heard. That's the whole point of me even being here. Because what they didn't know is I did that completely voluntarily. You can actually be paid as an election judge or an election clerk. I just did it because I wanted to help my community. And so when they understood that, that's when they actually started assisting and helping me be able to get my job done.
Hmm.
And I can understand with that anger and frustration when you don't feel like you are having your voice heard. And it can definitely cause a lot of anger. And I feel like when you're suppressed, then you're just bottling up a volcano that will eventually erupt. And I think that's what happened
Hmm.
with George Floyd and the several others that have been killed or severely injured by brutality of different forms.
That's a really good point. Yeah, John's next, really quickly. Yeah.
Side question for Professor Manzi and Professor Benton. Does Santayana come up as far as the life of reason and that whole section as far as how that relates to this, or am I going to derail things?
No, I'd love to hear you put the two together.
I'm just curious if it comes up in either course, so if there's any exposure to it.
Oh, in the courses. I don't teach it in my classes.
Will you repeat that one more time, John? Hey, John,
Absolutely.
I'm sorry. Will you repeat that one more
Absolutely. Does George Santayana's The Life of Reason come up in your 1301 course?
time? Not in mine.
Okay. So high level, where I was going with that as that relates to this subject, the common catchphrase, to sort of sum it up, I suppose, that you often hear is those who don't remember the past are condemned to repeat it. It's misquoted, but that's attributed to George Santayana, and something he published in early 1900s. I think around 1905 was when Life of Reason was done, if I'm not mistaken. What I understand, so please, Professor Manzi, Professor Benton, anyone else who studied this, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm definitely not an expert in this area, but the crux of that, the way I understood it was, for those of us that weren't or do not actually go and continue progressing through our natural states, learning from our environments, learning from the things around us, being open to the things around us, then we potentially wind up in this perpetual state or revert back to a state of infancy in our reactions, in our behaviors, in our responses. And it's through those growth experience that we learn how to form and build and shape our responses into not necessarily a more adult, because that's probably too broad and ill-defined a term, but a more potentially mature, more responsible, depending on your point of view, way of dealing with and interacting with society and ourselves. And so when you're talking about a situation like this, none of it's just history and humanity, but the situation we're talking about, the current political situation we're talking about, there could be a lot of question to be asked about how much of this might be a retrograde response versus this is how far I've come as a person, and this is what my response mechanisms have taught me to do in response to this behavior.
Great question.
How many times can I squeeze the word response in one sentence? Go.
Very well put, man.
Can I jump in, Jeff?
Go ahead, please, by all means.
Hey, Jeff. I was going to jump in here real quick. So first of all, John, my head exploded. That was quite a bit of stuff you threw out there. I'm going to try to address a little bit of it, at least the way I approach the issue that you're raising in my classes. So very early in the semester, we start off with the Socrates, the unexamined life is not worth living quote, and we talk about that. And one of the things we discuss is, first of all, what does that mean, and what does it mean to live an examined life? We talk about the importance of thinking rationally and reflecting on experiences, and that connects directly, I think, to what you're talking about, not only our personal experiences, but the experiences of humankind in the past, history, everything that is kind of we kind of inherit all this baggage. James Joyce said, I'm gonna paraphrase, but that we can't escape from history. And I believe that's true in a sense. It's a bit pessimistic, but at the same time, I think that when people are, for example, exposed to philosophical thinking and rational thinking, and they reflect on actions and positions politically and whatever else, and learn how to, it's not to say that emotions are bad, but when people can separate in this current situation, I think emotional responses from rational responses and reflect on what that means. I think that is something that's hopeful in terms of the possibility of allowing people to escape these horrific cycles that we see all the time.
I think you guys made a really great distinction there as to talking about how to act rational once you have examined. Maybe that can kind of give us the difference between the people who are protesting peacefully and the ones who are rioting. You know, you could make a claim to say the ones who are riot are kind of acting irrational in that sense, but I kind of want to give a different perspective on this. How do you feel when you have gone rationally about protesting and you have been peaceful, but yet you still don't see that change? You still see that in your community, you know, there's African Americans who are being shot down, and essentially you feel like the progress that you're making isn't enough. You know, what then? What do we do then? And I think that's the basis of this question of here. And just to relate it to the topic, I guess it kind of does puts us down in this spiral, or rather this cycle, or whichever way you want to put it. And I think it goes back to the idea that maybe we're not getting to the true root of the issue, or we're not seeing it through. Because I think a key difference between the civil rights movement and what's going on now is in the civil rights movement, you had really important figures like Martin Luther King, you had Malcolm X, and they were pushing specific political agendas. And nowadays, you don't really have those figures. You don't really have someone asking for something specifically. Now you're just having people protest. And so it kind of asks you, well, then what is the overall purpose? What is it that we're getting to? And I think that's one of the biggest issues of today, for sure.
Honestly, I don't think that there is I don't think it's murky as far as what the Black community is asking for. We're asking for equality. We're asking for fairness. I mean,
but how do
we're
you
asking to be valued.
Question?
I think that after a point of protesting, even over decades, and even almost a century now, I feel as though you have to start assessing different measures. And I'm not saying that I'm for the violent quote unquote protesting, but at the same time, if you're not being heard as a community, and if people can't outrightly see that how things are being done, it's just horrific and just senseless, then what will wake people up? It's what I'm getting at.
No, you're definitely making a good point in that, but I think what I'm trying to say before is that in the civil rights movement, we had very specific political agendas, like this is what we want to be passed. Now, yes, you're right. We do want equality. We do want this peace, but how do we get to it? What is the policy or what is the measure that needs to be taken for that to happen? You know that.
Well, you have to understand that all the policies are already passed. Like, we're just not being held up to the same standards as others. Like, it's already there. It's already in the Constitution. It's already in the rights and the bills and everything. It's already there. We're just still not being treated as other constituents in the community. There's nothing more to protest for, is what I'm saying.
Is that necessarily true though? Because with the police force, one of the things that they said about it's very difficult to actually, you know, prosecute a policeman because the way the system is set up, it kind of favors them, and so that the law is kind of on their side to say, well, it's your job to assess when you should use deadly force, and that is something that we can do in terms of policy wise. Maybe change that up a bit. I don't know necessarily how, but that is something that still exists, and that's a very political thing. You know, police are not getting prosecuted for killing people because essentially our justice system kind of favors them.
Right, but you have to understand that that's not new as far as us demanding judicial reform. Like, that's not a new thing. That's been going on for decades. So it's not like we've been like, oh, going through all these things and not wondering what we can push for. We've been pushing for reform. Like, that's not new. And I don't understand if people think that, you know, we don't have an idea of what we want from the things that we profess as far as Black Lives Matter, but like all of that has already been in the works. People have already been pushing for these things, and as you see, we still have presidents that do not want to do so. I mean, Trump's almost his words were he wants to let the police do what they do. He doesn't believe in the reform of the judicial system. Like that was in a part of his campaign. Like, he wasn't doing that. So there's only so much that we can do as far as peacefully and in terms of just wanting better for the Black community.
No, that's a really good point that you made. I'm sorry to keep this going. That's a really.
I was going to say we got.
I just want to say one more thing. I'm sorry. That's a really good point that you made about the candidates, and I think that's true. But that's kind of what I'm trying to get to as well. To say that, well, we kind of need to make this political movement to say, well, we can't keep letting these candidates who aren't actually helping reform get back into the office. We actually need to be active politically and make solutions to find people who are actually going to help. And I think that's what I was trying to get at before.
Yeah, I don't want to break up the back and forth. It's so good, but just we're coming up on 4 o'clock. Let's kind of like move to the chat room, and then maybe we can circle back.
Yeah. Okay. Fortuna, I believe, was next.
So Orlando, to answer your, I guess, statement that there's no specific agenda that we're pushing for, and I would say that the specific agendas that we're pushing for is to, like John said in the group chat, is to end qualified immunity in terms of the police force, and also end demilitarize the police force as well, because in other countries we see that these police officers aren't using lethal weapons in the sense that they don't need to use these lethal weapons. Give me 1 second. Hello?
Yeah.
So,
Hey.
hey guys. So yeah, and also I don't think that the writing is necessarily bad because, well, let's take the Boston Tea Party, for example. I know it came a little late, so I don't know if anyone took it as an example, but that is taught in our history books. That is taught as an excellent example of patriotism, and to say that the Boston Tea Party, to say that that was a bad move, is very anti-American. That would be a very anti-American sentiment. So in that sense, I think that the writers are doing great, and I see their anger because I personally worked for Beto when he was running for senator, and I registered a lot of people to vote, and even political reform through voting doesn't really do much. Can you guys stop talking? Oh, sorry. even voting through political form doesn't do much because there's a lot of voter applications that were rejected because they were online. People were being turned away at the polls. There's so many ways that this system oppresses us. And I'm not saying let's end racism. I don't think that racism can be ended necessarily within a few different laws, but we can end a systematic aspect of racism that's constantly putting these people down. And at this point, I'm mad, and I don't think that anyone has a right to tell Black people how they have a right to riot and how they have a right to protest, because Colin Kaepernick tried that and he was kicked off the NFL. He tried a peaceful protest. MLK tried that and he was assassinated, right? So all these people that were, citing as peaceful protesters, they weren't listened to either. And, some people today that would cite them, I'm not referring to you guys, but some people today that would cite them are twisting his words when he was the one who said that a riot is the language of unheard. And his own children are standing with these violent protesters. And even big corporations like Target are standing by these protesters and standing by these rioters. So honestly, I'm going to go ahead and say that this rioting is very American and it's moral. And I think that I stand by it as long as small businesses aren't being looted in the process. But that's just, I think, thank you, Marcus. I think that's just a sad aspect of collateral damage. And lastly, I don't think that I don't think that minorities are the ones that need to start off by being peaceful, right? I think that police officers need to extend that hand first because they're the ones who created all this mistrust between these communities of minorities and themselves. And they can take off that badge, right? They can quit being a police officer, but like as a minority, I'm stuck with that burden for the rest of my life. So I don't really think it's necessarily on me to start off with that peacefulness and start off with that conversation. I think police officers need to remedy this distrust between minorities and their communities. And that's, I think, along with ending this systematic racism and this systematic oppression of rights, needs to be done.
Yeah, super insightful points, Fortuna, for sure. And I want to see how that's received by people. I will say this. At the very beginning, Orlando talked about how, he was concerned that maybe, by and large, people are seen as, kind of like, how to put this? I don't want to say commodities exactly, but they're sort of seen as just like a natural filler for what's required for a society to function, are the individuals. And so it's less so much, to his point here, it was less so much a matter of distinguishing individuals by this standard or that standard or that standard. And it's more generally an idea of, well, just typically speaking, people who aren't in power are just kind of like, for the gristle mill. And so I think that's a point of injustice because, again, it's treating human beings as less than human. It's being okay with all this collateral damage. And especially when one identifies oneself as, how to put this, the target of acceptable collateral damage, that's when people feel, undignified. That's when people feel the need to rise up and defend their justice. What's unfortunate is in doing that, this same group is now doing the same thing. They're okay with collateral damage. I don't really see the difference generally. It's just two different sides doing the same thing in accordance with their means. And unfortunately, the facts are that it's small businesses that are taking the brunt of this, and it's to a large extent. I mean, Deep Ellum is destroyed. My downtown, it's not small businesses downtown, but the big businesses here are destroyed too. It's really it's just so unfortunate because the peaceful protest demonstration that I witnessed was touching. It was moving, and then to see these sort of outliers here, it's almost, what's ironic to me, and I'll leave it at this, is that I saw a lot of people, 700 strong. I saw them walk down my street. A lot of those people, it seemed to me, are the very people that frequent Deep Ellum. So it's like you're hurting the people that are supporting you. It's really tough for me to follow. That's all.
I think in response to that, I would say that when I said it was collateral damage, speaking as someone who was at the protest in terms of being at the violent aspect of the protest where people were smashing in windows and destroying buildings, if someone said, for example, people are spray painting a building, not to say I took any partaking in this, I'm going to claim the fifth here, but say if that was happening and someone would tell us, hey, this is Mexican owned, keep it moving. Okay, we keep it pushing. Hey, small business, don't touch it. right? So I think that people for the most part did try to be conscious of that and did try to be mindful of that. But I would say honestly that this stuff can be repaired and it can be fixed and something can be done about it. But, in terms of valuing human lives over, corporations and these big corporations that already have a lot of money, it kind of gets a little iffy there. And it definitely sucks. It definitely sucks for these small businesses that have put their livelihood in here. But a lot of them have come out to say, hey, I still support Black Lives Matter. I still support this movement. So just thought that was interesting. But yeah.
Yeah, great response.
Yeah, I also agree. You just can't compare murder with destruction of a facility and deterioration of a business. There's no comparison. That's not two sides doing the same thing. I'm sorry, I just disagree with that. But that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah. But,
Okay, we're coming up at 20 minutes left. Yeah, let's go to the chat, see who's next.
Go
We got a
ahead,
queue.
Fernando, I'm
Okay.
sorry.
Yes, it's me. Hello. It's something that I think I mentioned it before when I was talking about this same issue with MAP. But I do believe that it's also related to what you're talking. That we as a society, we are society because of our social construct, whether they are spoken or non-spoken. And so a lot of the issue that is happening is that there is a very specific side of the community who is receiving, whose rights according to these social constructs are not being properly respected. And the issue is that we can't really expect to ask those being affected that way systematically to keep honoring the social construct where they're not receiving that same honor. So I think like that's why like you see these kind of like responses where they are like, okay, we're not being heard and we are keep like systematically being damaged and our rights are not being there. So we are gonna do things that are not supposed to be right, because if you are not respecting us, why should I also respect that contract that we established? And it is even more strong because those who are being harmful in this regard are those who were supposed to protect those social contracts. So it's kind of like those people don't really have somebody to turn to. It's not like they can just go to the police and say, hey, they're stealing from me. It's the police who's actually like killing you and doing the damage in this case. So it's not like I condone destroying businesses and stuff like that, because I think that's unnecessary and actually kind of like damage your whole purpose. Because you are creating a different ramification of your actions. What is happening right now, it was kind of like a domino effect that was kind of developing until, okay, here it is, that this is the response. But when you are starting to destroy like a small business and a big businesses, whatever, you're creating a different type of things that can happen in the future. Like, for example, like they start believing like, okay, in order for me to continue having a business, I maybe have to be armed. So whoever get close to my property, I gonna shoot, because you know what, I don't want to go into the same thing that happened before, that you destroy my business. And you can start like creating a different type of actions that before it wasn't there, just because you wanted your voice to be heard. I'm not saying that you don't have to be protesting or anything, but and it's hard to really come up with a perfect solution, because regardless of what you do, it has to be somehow polemical for it to be actually heard. But I do believe that we do need to start creating a better social construct that everyone can agree better on it.
Really good point, man.
Very exciting.
Marcus is next.
Well said, Ferdinando, and I'm loving what everyone's saying. This is an absolutely fantastic conversation. I like looking at stuff in this way, because I think it reveals something, very unique to humans. So I like to strip every characteristic away from a situation down to the very thing. So let's just say you had a video of a clash of protesters and police, but then replace all the images with just stick figures, okay? And then replace the president and Twitter and everyone on Twitter with a stick figure saying this about another stick figure, a stick figure, beat up another stick figure for standing in the way of more stick figures. But then add some characteristics to it, and you see where the identifiers start grouping themselves together, etc. What I mean is like positions of authority start grouping together. Obviously, the cops are a position of authority, and what everyone is becoming, whether we like to or not, we somewhat become a part of a mob mentality, where the cops themselves are very, very guilty of this, very guilty of it. It's even more so because they're not just a mob mentality, they're an authoritative mob mentality. So that's even, they now have authoritative power, but they get to use it in a mob scenario. So now it is not displaced. It's the responsibility is not only displaced to the mob, but it's also displaced to the system that they're a part of. And so now it's almost absolving them of all individual responsibility. Say if a guy smacks a guy's leg as he's trying to get away from the front lines of the police, it's like, I didn't do that. It's like the system told me to do it. They authorized me to do that. But then you take the mob of peaceful protesters. This is an identifiers who have grouped together stick figure people who have identified themselves as wanting to perform in this certain way. And so then they do such thing. And then you see more identifiers such as the rioters, or those who then, or rioters who are, as the best way, rioting in a good way, and then those who are rioting in a very poor way, becoming part of the riot mob, and then taking advantage of it for a pure release of energy and destruction. I mean, I'm sure we've all seen videos of like, I know I've seen a video of literally a celebrity in a mall smashing a window of a car there for no reason. It's like, all right, cool, bro, but it's like, you wanted to be a part of destruction. You know, we humans like seeing destruction. Everyone likes seeing explosions, right? So it becomes easier then to become part of the destruction when you see everyone destroying. And then it also takes away from the good purpose that that destruction might have when those with no will, or they don't care if they hurt small businesses. They just like destroying. And let's admit there are people like that out there in the world who just like seeing things burn. You know, some of them are in power and some of them are citizens. A lot of them are in power, let's be honest though. So that is the first level of, you got to remove yourself from that and then look at it. And then we don't know a proper solution, like we all said, but it's like, you got to first identify with the human mob before you identify with any other mob, is what I'm trying to say. The humankind mob, which is, you're fighting for humankind. You're fighting for the coming together of everyone. We all want the cops to lay down all their weapons all at once. And we want Trump to come out and say, yo, I'm so sorry for being you know, excuse my language, a dick about it. I'm so sorry for letting the situation go on, or anyone in power. We want apologies, we want action. But then because they're grouped together, they have limits around their actions, seemingly. They don't see over the fence that that is the limit of that mob almost, you know. They see no other option of freedom other than to continue. Like I saw a video of this man who, you know, used to work for a police department, and then he's like, yo, can I kneel? Like with them, I wasn't able to kneel yesterday, but I would love to kneel today. And I said, no, you can't. And he goes, I want to speak to my supervisor, or the captain. And someone came up to him and said, yo, what's up? And he goes, are you my captain? I want to talk to you if you're not. He goes, you cannot kneel. He goes, can I talk to my captain? They say no. And he turned in his badge. And then he's with the protest the next day. Those are options of freedom that everyone and every mob has to switch and move accordingly so. But, you know, just some people don't take those freedoms, then they choose to ignore them. And I don't really know the best way to wake everyone up to those options, but I think one of the best ways is just to talk about it, to reveal to them that these are options, and to then not ridicule them for turning themselves around. We want racists to change their minds. You know, I would prefer, I love seeing old racists become like loving people. It's the most beautiful thing. If you've ever seen, like, you know, a black man in a KKK meeting, you know, those types of videos, it's so beautiful. It's much more beautiful than seeing them all die, in my opinion. Because, you know, how can you fix the problem? Oh, they can all die and then we'll be okay. Or, you know, everyone evil can. I'd much rather see evil turn good than everything go away. Because I think it's worth more. And I think it proves more about us than if it went the other way. And I yield the rest.
Yeah, we rise to our humanity. I like that, Marcus.
Yeah, I believe Rory was next.
Hi, everybody. At first, I'm trying to find a clip that I saw on Facebook, but you guys may know what I'm talking about, where there was an instance that some of the leading founders of the Black Lives Movement went to I think it was in DC or New York City, and they went to a MAGA event, and that it was hostile at first, but then when people actually started listening to the Black Lives Matter founders and movement, that they actually saw that there was more commonality than what they even began to think of. And hopefully I can find the video and I can send it to Ferdinando for another time. But I would like to ask Professor Manzi, how did the philosophy and psychology of money give so much power to certain groups of individuals? And I ask that because if you manipulate the value of the dollar, sorry, someone's calling me. If you manipulate the value of the dollar in our society, then depending on how you manipulate it, you can influence how government responds to voice.
I see what you're saying. I mean, listen, that's an awesome question, and I'm happy to give a very robust response to it. Once upon a time, I went to Yale University and took a whole seminar on philosophy of money, and there's a lot to what you just asked. I'm just going to table it for the moment, only because I do want to make sure that those who want to speak on this topic get a chance to do so while the thoughts are still fresh in their head. But I love that. That could be a topic for next week, perhaps. Philosophy of money, or just what is money, or what is the role of it? I mean, that's a cool thought. Yeah. So I'm not copping out. I'm going to respond at some point, but just to keep the queue moving. But thank you.
I see that Fortuna's next, but I think I'm gonna let Kenny go first because he hasn't spoken yet.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Okay, so like, I just gotta say that what Rory just said about how the blacks and the MAGA movements were first half hostile and then started to talking it out. It's kind of similar to a video I saw on Twitter where a black person was in front of a crowd with police officers and he was just giving hugs to them, which I thought was, or believed was pretty, humane since it's to pretty much human beings with titles. And the other side, they're protesting, they were against them, the ones, the guy that was congratulating the cops, something that because all cops are bad, but that proves that not all of them are. I know there's some videos I saw where a couple of cops did some pretty aggressive stuff that actually violates the amendments, but it's just on them personally. So I was believing that we should do more stuff that the one guy just did, just pretty much treat everybody equally, despite the titles they have.
Yeah, I second that sentiment, Kenny. Just real quick, did you say was giving host?
I meant like hostile, but and then I meant hugs. Hostile first and hugs. Similar
Okay.
to what Rory said. So
I thought you meant like giving communion. Oh, okay.
yeah.
Like the host of Christ or something. Okay. No, I agree. I mean, that's beautiful. Yeah. Send me that video. Love to see it.
I can say it in the chat. Let me just get it.
Okay.
So like you can move on.
Already, Fortuna.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, my computer was acting up. To answer that question would be a great topic earlier about how certain groups are oppressed and like how that, kind of originated from, would be a great topic for next week. I just want to say in terms of like the money behind that, but also I just want to emphasize this idea that like, I'm not asking for unity. Me personally as a protester, I'm not asking for people to stop being racist because I think that to stop being racist is very difficult and involves intergenerational change and a lot of education, but also I don't care. I don't care if somebody doesn't like me for the color of my skin. What I care is making sure that I have the same access to levels of education as my white peers. I care about the fact that I don't want my brother to get shot in the street for having, a toy gun in his hand, if that makes sense. So personally, I don't care about, unifying the human race in terms of making sure that everyone's not racist. For now, what I want is for the police to be demilitarized. I want justice to be served for the killers of George, right? George Floyd. So I don't know, this might sound a little like bleak, I guess, in a sense that I don't care for unity. But yeah, I guess it sounds bleak that I don't care for unity, but in that sense, I'm saying that racism maybe not be able to solve, but we can solve systematic racism. We can solve these systematic barriers that continue to put people of color down. But racism is kind of a bigger issue that I think people try to focus on, and they try to change the conversation of that. And I don't think that the conversation needs to be focused on racism, but rather these systematic forms of racism that this country was built on, and the system of these systems of racism are working perfectly, right? There's no one that can deny that. You know, since this country was founded, it was meant to put Black and brown bodies down at the bottom, and that system is working excellently. So maybe it requires a complete overhaul of that system, and maybe it requires a revolution, or maybe it requires appealing of laws and changing laws and adding new laws or whatever. But yeah, I definitely think that systematic change needs to occur. And I don't care if, you know, the white person living across the street from me hates me for my skin color. I just want to make sure that that doesn't get in my way of my right to live and the way of others' rights to live.
Heck yeah.
B is next.
The topic kind of went, hello. The topic kind of went to the other direction, so what I'm about to say is kind of irrelevant at this point. So anyone who wants to go can go next.
No, come on, I want to hear it.
No, go ahead.
No longer.
But just say it. So.
Well.
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I remember Kenny saying about how the Black people were giving hugs to the police after the protest and after all of this hostility. And I think because peaceful protest does not, well, in this current, with all the examples, it shows that it doesn't really work as much as we want it to work. So I think with this protest, hostility is needed, but there should be a point where it should stop and come at peace, and that could only happen when they I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I'm out of words.
You're doing well. Don't worry.
No, I'm not. But anyway, I remember the video where Kenny was saying that the Black person the Black people were mad at this Black person for taking the police's side, but he said that I don't see you any different from them. You're a human being to me, and they're a human being to me. This policeman did not kill anyone. That policeman did not kill anyone. Just because they're police officers, it does not mean that they're racist. So it's not them that it should not be a fight between people versus the police, but rather people versus racist people instead.
Can I say something if no one else is gonna be on the list?
Go for it.
You know, I understand what you're saying about us being against racist people, but I think I want to say that I support the whole like all cops are bad movement in a sense, because any cop that doesn't actively fight against their cops that do oppress people, and let's say like 10% of cops are actually bad cops, right? And that's a pretty generous number. I genuinely believe that a solid amount of cops out there are good people and they don't have bad intentions. Maybe they have these subconscious biases, but I think overall they're probably excellent people. But if they stand complicit during that, I think that they're just as bad as their other cops. And, you know, we had someone mention that example of the dude who quit his police force. I think that shouldn't have been an option for him. I wish that he was able to stay on the police force and still protest and still exercise his rights. But there's definitely this mindset on police forces of you're either with us or against us. And then we have that same mindset with the protesters. So it kind of gets a little tricky, but I definitely think that anyone who's complicit in these acts of racism and sees this happen and doesn't do anything about it, especially someone from a position of power as a police officer, I definitely think they're just as bad as the bad guys. But that's my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Anyone who, if you witness something like that and you don't say anything, it is almost, if not just as bad as doing it yourself. And the only way we can solve the issue of that is by speaking up in such instances, like exactly like you're saying. Like the cop standing next to the cop kneeling on George Floyd's neck. That man should have obviously done something, and he said some things. But at that point, shove him off of it, punch him in the face. I don't know, do something. You know what I mean? But it's like it's standing idly by as you witness something right in front of you that perpetuates the system that we all hate. So absolutely, yes. Anyone speak out anytime you see something even remotely that you disagree with. Because if you don't voice yourself in that moment, are there any voices heard by the person doing it? Almost none. You know, everyone's just going to stand and they're then going to see that people see what they're doing and then feel as if it's approved by them because nothing was said. And that is an issue that humans have such a problem with. And if we got over that, we probably could have been over this years and years ago. But we've allowed it to happen. It's like it's sad, but I don't. Very well said. Yeah, that's all I just wanted to say.
I sort of agree with what Tina was saying about the systematic racism essentially and the issue there. I don't necessarily know if I agree with the idea that all cops are bad, because I believe the system in and of itself is kind of stacked against them to actually make a stand. Just as I kind of believe it's sort of stacked against people to protest as well. And that's where it gets back to my grand point, is like the idea of actually, I don't necessarily mean just having the solution, but actually moving towards it. And the reason I say that is because yes, you can protest or you could riot, and you could see the perspective on both sides as to why it's a conversation, you know, MLK and Malcolm X literally had. That's one of their most famous conversations. But the idea is that you have to do it strategically. You have to understand what it is exactly that you're moving towards. Because if because then people take the violence, they take the rioting, and they say, oh, look at these people, they're just being violent, they're just being hoodlums or whatever. But the media is doing that. The media essentially is painting a bad image. They're taking that and essentially using it against you. So that's why it's very important, I think, to have this strategic mindset and to understand what exactly it is you're moving towards.
I have one short comment to make, if I can. I just think it's hilarious that when America or police officers in general look at any black person, you know, it's always that given stipulation or assumed guilt or lesser than, or whatever the case may be, whatever racism entails on that from that individual, and how we don't get a chance to say, hey, that, you know, we have certain characteristics of us that exceed all those things, but yet we're all generalized as, you know, a group of people who don't have, who broke, who poor, who care less, who are lazy, who are stupid, or whatever the case may be. But when asked the same thing of police officers, we're supposed to say, not all police officers are bad. You know, it's just, it's crazy to me that that's even a concern or an issue when black people every day, no matter where we go, are looked at generally the same way. So I just think that that's preposterous. Like, it doesn't make sense to me, but people won't look at it that way. They just don't want, you know, black people, they don't want police officers to be subjected to just being the bad guys overall, when they look at black people as the bad guys overall. So.
Yeah. And I think it's just also like, it's a structural issue. You know, I feel like a policeman can go into the police force with the best of intentions and try to do the best they can, but it seems like maybe the system in and of itself is kind of, like I said, stacked against them. So it's kind of difficult to entirely put the blame on them, is my things, because just how it's kind of stacked against a minority essentially to kind of voice themselves, you know, you kind of have to wonder, well, how much is it stacked against a regular policeman who's just joined the force, who's just got into the police, who's just put their entire life into this?
But again, a police officer can take off that badge.
I'm sorry? Yeah, I understand. And so that's also the point, though, is like how for them, maybe it's their livelihood. Maybe it goes back to the issue of, well, they're living inside their own bubble. And to some extent, citizens live in their own bubble as well. You know, we have a lot of these people who are protesting, but in their regular life, without this big movement, do they regularly have this same mindset of helping? Aren't they living in their own bubble? aren't they just as bad as the police who aren't standing up?
You mean racist people or people who like who are you
People in
talking
general
to?
who aren't acting.
Say that again. I'm sorry.
Yeah, say that again. You broke up.
Or just people in general who aren't acting.
Yeah, I definitely agree that there are many people who are living in a bubble, but I think most of those people are white. I don't think that there are many black people who live in a bubble. We're forced with now. Some people do just take the bullet and say, "Hey, this is racism. I'm still going to push to do and be the best that I can be for myself and for my children." And you can call that living in a bubble. But as far as it's just not. I don't think that that's the same as far as to say that there are police officers who are because your job is to enforce what is right. Like that's what you signed up for, regardless of who's over your boss. Like the law, you're supposed to be enforcing the law on men equally. So
yeah, and I agree. And kind of what I'm saying here, sorry, is that for some people, they have children, they have, let's say, that, they have responsibilities, they have jobs every single day. They kind of, in a sense, don't have the time, I guess, to kind of act in that sense. Regular people, minority or not, and so you could kind of apply that same kind of perspective into maybe the police force, who maybe for them they've made their entire living, they have entire household to kind of look after, and what you're kind of asking of them is like, you know what, give that all up, and if you don't, this is all your fault.
Yeah, the problem is that positions of authority naturally attract those who also would like to do harm with such authority, because as we said, they grow up and then it is attractive to them because they know that that position of authority has power. And so that's why Socrates says, do you give power to those who don't want it? Because they're going to use it the best almost most of the time. So, if you made men who don't like confrontation cops, imagine, imagine the difference. That'd be really nice. But the problem is that, again, like we've all said, positions of authority attract sometimes they attract those who wish to do good, but a lot of times we've all agreed that they attract very bad people who wish to do harm because they have knowledge that that position of authority grants them power that being that normal person does not. So then they get to perpetuate whatever ideas they grew up with, etc., as a part of the system to satisfy their own need to do such thing or whatever. It's pathetic, and there should be a solution to the systematic problem. And I don't think it's ever going to be fixed until we say something like Socrates says, where let's reinvent the how we grant authority in this country. But to have that conversation would be impressive. I hope it happens, though. I want it to happen. But with who's in charge right now, let's see if it can. Good luck trying to get him to talk about that. But
I think that point about power corrupting is and also power being desirable is an interesting paradox. And just to Jeremy's point, I think that and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like what you're saying is that if you're a minority, you don't have the luxury of living in a bubble. The bubble's constantly being punctured by sort of standards that are set up that aren't necessarily considerate of your conscience. Am I breaking up?
No, you're fine.
Okay, cool. And so it's like, look, I'll be honest with you. When I was watching people get arrested in front of my building, and look, I don't know if you've seen that viral video about the proprietor getting beaten within an inch of his life in Dallas. That happened on my block. What I noticed was that when people were being arrested, and there were still plenty of people who came back even after the tear gas had settled to try to protest the people being arrested. I noticed that many of the minorities were getting mad at the minority cops. They were almost ignoring all of the white cops who were arresting people, and they were screaming at the minority cops like, "What are you doing?" It was pretty intense. It was pretty raw, and I think that is kind of what Jeremy's speaking to on some level, and Fortuna. Something along those lines, where it's like, well, as somebody who feels this constantly, this sort of oppression, it's like you look at somebody who is maybe as a minority ascended to a level of authority, and it's like, how are you sanctioning this? that seemed to be what the spirit of the complaints were. It's not what the words were, but and you know, it's I mean, I can't help but acknowledge there's definitely something to it.
Well,
That's a great point.
to ask a question though. How much influence do they have if they do take a stand? You know, and you could say something as simple as, well, they could just leave. But then if they do leave, then doesn't that kind of just make it even worse because they do have just a bunch of bad cops that are in the field?
No,
Well, that's
cops should leave. They should be complicit in the system. I'm not saying
Oh, you're breaking up. I'm not sure if it's just mine.
y'all hear me now?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, I'm not saying you don't necessarily quit your job just because you're a cop, but whenever we say a badge, it means that sure, cops go through a lot because, you know, they are police officers, they don't have a choice, but they kind of do have a choice in that sense. I think that's what we mean by you can take off the badge, but, you know, I can't take off my skin color. I can't stop being a Black person, but as a cop, if you're going through hardship, you can quit being a cop. You have that option, you have that choice. And if you're standing up for what's right, it's sad that you feel like that's your only choice to quit in order to do that. And that shouldn't happen, but I think that's what people mean when they say that you can take off a badge, in the sense that you're not best for being a cop because being a cop isn't an identity.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with the sentiment there. Like the whole idea is just, I just am not so quick to essentially blame all cops. I think the whole idea is a fixing of the system, not essentially a blame on the cops as a whole.
Yeah, Orlando, you're saying many cops have good intentions, but they basically can only work within the system. Yeah. Okay. All right, y'all. We're 10 minutes over. We got to decide a topic for next week.
We should pick a topic for next week. Anybody have?
Yeah.
Didn't we have one already?
The money thing? I mean, I'm down with that.
I'm down with that too.
Yeah, I love talking about money and how it corrupts man. Oh man, that's a great conversation.
I like that one too.
So,
So what's the name of that topic then? What should we call it? Philosophy.
Yeah,
philosophy of
philosophy of money or something like that.
That's
So
cool, man.
my specific question is, because I sent it to Marcus, but my specific question is, how does the philosophy and psychology on the value of money influence governmental affairs?
Oh, I love that. Yeah, massively. You know, what's it? Lobbying is a prime example of that. So, you know,
See you
it's a
later,
very
Jimmy.
prime example of that.
Money. How about money and influence? Could you put it?
Yes, that's a
Money and
wonderful
influence.
topic. Money and
Money,
influence.
influence, and
power.
government.
I mean, we could have already talked about power. But...
Money, influence, and government. I love it.
All right. Anybody else have any other suggestions?
I want
I'm
to
down for it.
do the scope of maybe like why certain people have more money than others, maybe.
So like analyzing
That's a
socioeconomic
subtopic. Cool.
Maybe like socioeconomic effects, maybe.
We'll talk about corruption of man through money, power, and government, and then how that then perpetuates a system of dishonesty and or unfairness throughout the rest of the government system.
I think
Naturally, those with money and power rise to the top of government, and then it perpetuates a system that benefits them the best. You know.
I think we can fit that into the first one.
Yeah, and if somebody can explain to me what Bitcoin is, perfect.
Currency, man. It's already getting
It's already.
it's already fucked. So yeah. So if we don't have any other suggestions, next week's topic is going to be money and influence.
I like it.
And government.
And government.
And government, sure.
Excellent.
All right, awesome guys.
Awesome. Great conversation, y'all. This was fantastic.
Yes, it was.
Thank you guys for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Of course.
Have you?
Glad to have you.
You're welcome.
Thank you guys.
Thank
Of
you.
course. I'll see y'all later.
Is it always on Tuesdays or at 3:30 to 4:30?
Yes.
3:30 to 4:30. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Or 5.
Yeah, some days we're bound to go over.
Well, I'll be here. And I look
All right,
forward
so-
to taking your class, Professor Manzi.
Yeah, I look forward to having you as a student. All right, y'all. Have a great week. I'll see some of y'all next Tuesday. Hope I see all y'all. today?
Question,
Yeah,
Nancy.
Izzy, you mind waiting a bit?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Let's see. Yeah.
Mm.
So
What's up, Fernando?
I have a
everybody
Yeah, I
here.
have a question.
We're
What's up?
gonna infer the
Um,
Marcus.
how busy are you, Nancy? I'm trying to Mrs. Stephen. She sent like something related to like submit an essay that it can be like in a competition kind of thing. And I would like to expand a little bit more the last essay that I was writing on education with your class.
Yeah, no, that sounds awesome. Sure.
Yeah, but I feel like I may need your input maybe so I can like expand a little bit more before submitting it to her by Friday. So I don't know
Yeah.
exactly if or not.
I'll make time for it. Yeah, send me the whatever the competition link is, and then obviously I have your essay. And send me if you have any revisions that you've made since you submitted it. But yeah, if not, I'll give you some feedback given what I take them to be looking for. Yeah, happy to.
Yeah, I'm not completely sure what they're looking for, but it is something regarding NSCS, I believe. But Stephen, Kathleen Stephen sent that to every honor student to participate. So I'm gonna like, okay, since I already have that, then the words count kind of like cut me, so I kind of like had to like chop it. So I was like, okay, I can maybe use that because I don't see any other write-off like really. But that was a very good topic, and I can't really explore the one that I mentioned you before with the that I wanted to use for the conference that you wanted us to go to. So I can go with that one. So it's okay.
Yeah, happy to help. Yeah, send me the info, and you said it's due Friday. Yeah, it's plenty of time.
Yeah, I saw that email too. It was super vague. It didn't actually say any specific like.
Yeah, like I asked Kathleen, like that's so vague. Like, how am I supposed to know if my topic is gonna be well received? Like, how can you define who is being better in the writing style or anything? So I don't know exactly how it is implied. So I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go just with my philosophy since it's related somehow to education. So kind of like it has religion, it has education, it's philosophy. So I kind of like, okay.
I was thinking about throwing one of my essays in there too, just cause like a random one I had. That sounds cool.
You both should. Yeah, happy to help out both of you.
I sent my paper to Dr. Stevens about for my psychology paper the intimate social relationships and responsibilities of direct election officials and the public. And so if any of you are interested in reading in that, I talk about the social connections model by Dr. Young.
Yeah, that's the one that you made me read, right?
Yes, but it's not 3,000 words this time.
Yeah, it's a good essay.
All right, well, everybody left except for like us, so we should probably call.
Bye, I'll see you guys
later.
See you later.
Hey guys, before you go,
what's up?
Fernando, Jeff, Marcus, I guess B too. So I was thinking about having like maybe an officer meeting, maybe like for a transition for next semester or something, so you guys can take over and whatnot. But also just to kind of get like an agenda or like to see what we want to do for maybe the summer or upcoming semester.
Yeah, that's down.
Would you guys want to meet in person or like is a Zoom call more convenient for you guys? What do you guys think?
I like to meet
yeah, Zoom is okay.
Yeah, Zoom meeting.
Okay, Zoom meeting. Do you guys have contact with Fortuna by chance?
I don't.
I don't have no.
Yeah, no.
Texting
Jeff.
with her right now. Do you need her number? I'm not going to broadcast it on here, but I'll ask her if I can pass it on to you or to Manzi.
Yeah, and add it to the WhatsApp group.
Wait, I need to make another WhatsApp. But yeah, so we can do the meeting and then see how it goes from there.
What day and what time you're thinking of doing that?
TBD, I guess.
I think we should probably get everybody in a chat and then see what's a good time for everybody because not everybody's here. So yeah.
All right. Good shit.
So what do you need from me? Do you have like my phone number or something?
I'll get it from you on Instagram or something.
Okay, that's fine.
And I think I have B's on Marcus. Yeah.
Yeah, make sure everybody here is all in the same WhatsApp.
Yeah, no,
do I need to download WhatsApp?
Yeah, last summer.
Do you have WhatsApp? I tried to invite you like a long time ago, and then you just never joined.
Damn it. Right.
It's okay.
Um,
Yeah, so actually, I think, Marcus, you're still, the invitation's probably still there. You probably just joined the group.
is it? Okay. I'll see about it. I'll text Orlando. I'll figure it out.
Okay, cool.
All right,
All right.
guys.
See y'all later. That was fun.
All right,
Yeah.
have a good week.
Bye bye.
See you next week. Bye.
Yes. Bye bye.